Okay, welcome to Bookstorm. We're thrilled to have the author Jessica Strawser with us today. She is editor at large for Writer's Digest and has been for nearly a decade. She's written for the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and others. She's the author of a lot of book club favorites: Almost Missed You, Not That I Could Tell, You Know Me, and we're here today to talk about our favorite book, A Million Reasons Why. Jodi Picoult, the number one New York Times best-selling author, calls this book a fascinating foray into the questions we are most afraid to ask. What constitutes family? What are our obligations to those we love? Where does American healthcare fail us the most? And what secrets are unforgivable? Goodreads names this book one of the most anticipated mysteries of 2021. It's also highly recommended by E! News, honored by the Los Angeles Daily News, the Associated Press, the American Library Association, and Library Journal. Jessica lives with her husband and two children in Cincinnati. And Jessica, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Bookstorm today. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Jessica, we love to give our readers and would be readers a little bit of a glimpse of the book without giving away any spoilers, of course. So, if you'll indulge me just for a second, I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the background and some of the things you're exploring in the book.
Sure.
Um, this book is about two women who are strangers to one another. They both take a DNA test and they find there is a relationship. One of them, Caroline, she seems to have it all. She's got a strong marriage, a loving relationship with her parents, three healthy, bright children, a successful job. The other, Sela, is dealing with significant challenges in her life, including the loss of a parent, other losses, and a chronic health condition. In fact, she needs a kidney. And we start to see where some of these stories come together. In this story, the results of a DNA test are shocking. They turn the lives of these women upside down. And one of the things that we really enjoyed in the story are all of the supporting characters are dealing with things in their own way. We see responses to family secrets, responses to illness, responses to surprises, and everybody copes differently. So we're excited because you really delved into the limits of a mother's love, for example, and even the limits of forgiveness. So if you're ready, I don't know, Chris, Jessica, are you ready to brave the storm? We
Yes,
certainly
it's
are.
a big old can of worms opened in this book. Yeah.
It's sure we could talk about this for hours. We so much adored this book. Our first question is, this wonderful story helps the reader to understand that family secrets and lies have repercussions. Withholding family truths, even keeping certain family members away from one another, may have a butterfly effect. It could alter and change the lives of generations to come. Whether the reason is due to a family feud or maybe a fear or a toxic person, we can't help but see that one individual's choice ultimately affects a lot of people. And we were wondering, is this a theme that you intended to share with your readers? Or was this rather something that even you as the writer discovered with the unfolding of this story?
Well, I knew the potential for all that was in there simply by beginning with an unexpected result from a mail-in DNA test kit because holy wow, is real life full of a lot of stories that begin that way. And I just was really fascinated. When I was coming up with the idea for this story, I kept noticing these real life stories of people who have their lives changed, for better or worse, by unexpected test results. And I was thinking, why am I so drawn to the? What is it about this that I find so fascinating? I mean, I could not scroll past an article, a clickbait headline about it without clicking. And I think part of it is because we never knew, a generation ago, we never could have imagined that this technology would not only be available, but so readily available. where, I mean, you can get a DNA test run on your dog, right? For a very small amount of money. So, you talked about somebody making a decision, to not share that there was a potential that somebody has a half sibling out in the world. And when the character made that decision, they never imagined that it would be possible for it to come out in this way. And I think, in real life, when this kind of thing happens, it's usually people are in one of two camps. Either they go looking, knowing something's out there to be found, and if they find it, it's an answered prayer, or they take a test sort of on a whim, and then all of a sudden something happens that is way more than they bargained for, and maybe they wish they didn't know that information, but there's no way to undo it once it's done. And so my initial concept for the novel was to have two strangers who are linked by such a test and have one in each camp, the person who goes in eyes wide open and the person who's about to be blindsided, and then to have something happen in the story that would make them sort of switch stances, where the person who went in intentionally maybe starts to think, I should not have done this, and the person who was blindsided by the results starts to think, I think I actually deserve to know these things about my life, and my life will also be richer for it. So that was my initial concept. Obviously, it got a lot more specific from there, but I think a lot of people can relate.
I think probably everyone can relate in some form or another. And it really made Kristen and I think, we think we don't want to know. But if the curtain was put before us and someone said, there's a secret behind here about you and your family that's going to change your life, would we be able to not look? It's
Right.
just such an interesting theory. And then we even took it a step further. Are there any secrets that should stay a secret? And we all have these
Right.
issues in our families too. But the book unfolded so many really deep, thoughtful discussions and even questions that we can ask our own selves about our family and what's important to us and what matters and what we need to share, what we need to keep secret. Just a great story, the way that you told it. Very heartfelt. Thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, in my own, circle of friends and family, we've had a situation that was very similar to this. And in our situation, it turned out to be a beautiful, beautiful situation. Relationships restored, and you could see where love has this infinite capacity to grow and grow. Sometimes, for example, when you have a child, you think, how could I love a second child as much as I love my first child? But that's an amazing thing about our hearts as humans. We have this capacity to just expand that circle of love. And that's what at least my family experienced in their DNA story.
I think we think of family in terms of, by and large as a culture, there's the family you're born into, and there's the family you choose. You hear about people having their holiday dinners, things like Friendsgiving, where, there's the family you're born into, and then there's the people you choose to surround yourself with. And finding out from one of these tests that you have another family member out there it kind of bridges the two, right? And it forces you to decide what it means to you to share DNA with somebody. There are lots of people who get a result, find out that someone else is out there, and decide to leave it alone. Like, that's interesting. I'm not sure I understand this result, and I'm not sure I want to. And then for other people, including the characters in my novel, you sort of know from the outset that they're not going to be able to leave it alone. It means something to them to be somebody's sister, even if it's someone that they don't know.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. One of the other themes that we saw emerging in the book dealt with this idea of a parent who is controlling or manipulative. And I just kind of wanted to broach this subject because I always think about, does a parent ever stop thinking about how their children should live their lives or wanting input in how their children live their lives? Do you think there's a line there where we have to draw a line and say, no more, I'm an adult now?
So to back up a bit, for those who maybe haven't read the book yet, she's speaking about Caroline's mother, who it's not a spoiler, it becomes clear pretty quickly on that she is maybe not quite so surprised by this revelation that her daughter has a half sister in the world. I don't know though, maybe this is an unpopular opinion. I don't know that I see her as controlling or manipulative. She certainly did not go into her situation with that intent. I think what she did was she made a bad decision out of fear. She made a decision out of fear when Caroline was a baby, or not even born yet, really, without thinking through what potential consequences that might have down the line should this come to light. She was certainly not thinking about, when my daughter is an adult, if she finds out that she has a half sister, how is this going to change her perception of everything? She was really thinking about self-preservation and her marriage and what was best for her in that moment. So she definitely made a selfish decision and a bad decision, and then reached a few points in her life where she trapped herself. And she had a choice to either own up to what she'd done or double down. And she doubled down. And that's where the controlling and manipulation comes in. But I think that she really felt backed into a corner. And it's really interesting. I think the decisions that we make from fear are very often not the best decisions.
Yeah, that was definitely the character. And maybe not even solely fear, but also we do a lot of things out of pride. I always say we are the center of our little universe here, and we all right away instantly think, how does this affect me? What is this going to do to me? What does this mean for me? But the not telling of important information, the secrecy of it, could it also be a lie? And then that would unfold. Sometimes those lies come out over time, and you didn't mean it to hurt anyone, you didn't mean it to be a lie, but the secrecy of it kind of was a lie. And the way that this unfolded in the story was so interesting and surprising to the reader. I really
definitely
loved
a snowball effect in a way that she could not have foreseen. Yes.
But you said something very interesting, and that is, from her perspective, she had justifications in her mind for what she did. But now you've got to think about how your children as adults perceive what you've done. And, I'm a mother of 4 young adults, and, I have to think about that and also take ownership over the choices I've made that they perceive later as being, controlling or something along those lines. I think about this all the time because it's a fine line when you have young adults, because you care about them and you want them to make healthy choices and you want them to, exercise and pay their bills on time and have things go smoothly for them. And there is a line where you can't cross as a parent because you have parented them, hopefully up to this point.
And I think for Caroline, it really, as she's trying to come to terms with, well, my mother is not necessarily the person I thought she was. My father's not necessarily the person I thought he was. She's not doing this in a bubble. She's doing this in her real life, which is she also has 3 young children. She's a working mom. She's constantly running from one thing to the next. Her life is pretty chaotic to start with. And she even sort of jokes in the text that she doesn't really have time to be having a personal crisis. She's not, and I think for her, she doesn't want to relate to her mom on that level, but certainly everything Caroline is doing in the story isn't necessarily with her children in mind. It's with trying to reconcile what she has what she has just found out about her parents and her sister. And I think there's a lot about, you mentioned earlier about the book verging into, our capacity to forgive each other. And I think it's a big thing to realize that your parents and the people around you are probably just doing their best and making mistakes along the way, just like you.
I say this all the time. I think for a good while when you're real little, you think your parents are perfect. And as you start to get into adolescent, all of a sudden you see, wait a minute, who are these 2 people that were my heroes? And we are imperfect. I tell my kids all the time, I'm just a regular person like you trying to make the right choices. And I heard someone say once, and I love this, I heard someone say, if you're worried about being a good parent, you're a good parent. You don't have to be a good parent, you just have to care. So at
Yeah.
least we got that down. So on a little different topic now, also in your story, of course, we have the situation where one of the character who went for the DNA testing is desperately in need of a kidney. And so this heartache of terminal and chronic illness really submerges the reader into some real life medical issues that go on today. And when dealing with limited resources, this struck us strongly. How do we decide which patient should be allowed to receive the long awaited organ? I was so interested in the facts that you brought out with this medical case that not just anyone can receive a kidney. You have to fill out a lengthy survey and qualify with all sorts of factors before you can be considered as being given this kidney. And I said, so we thought to ourselves, so what is it? Is it just those people that are healthy physically? What about mentally? Is it just those that are young who have a future ahead of them who get the expensive surgery or the clinical trial or the rare medication? Or let's take it further. Where does it stop? Maybe it's just people who are talented or smarter or more beautiful. Or what about lovable or kind? And where does it end? And how do we value one life over another? And who gets to decide? And I wondered, as an author, were you thinking about all these issues prior to the writing of this story? How did you stumble upon this issue about the need for a kidney and what the repercussions would be?
I knew that it was going to be morally fraught. In early conversations with my editor and my agent about this book, we kind of referred to it as a tangle of moral dilemmas
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just one moral dilemma. There are so many once you get into it. And, some of them, I knew that it was going to be fraught. I didn't know the intricacies of organ donation when I went in before I did my research. So the story was already underway before I started really unpacking some of the life or death questions that you just mentioned. And it's so cringy to even have to think about a panel of people deciding who is next in line for an organ and who is more worthy, but that is actually, somebody has to decide. And, we hear in daily life, what I did know going in was, you hear that there's a long wait list for live organ donation, and that people die waiting all the time. And I think I always thought of that literally as like you're waiting on your turn on the wait list, and then your turn doesn't come up fast enough. But actually, what happens a lot of times is that people end up getting taken off the list because if they've been waiting for too long and their health gets so poor, then the certainty that they will have a good outcome from that organ goes down. And so the decision is made that it should go to somebody who has a higher probability of having a good outcome with that work. And so that was those were the intricacies that I did not know going in. And I like to write toward questions that I do not know the answers to. And I think I did that a lot in writing A Million Reasons Why, just sort of laying it all out. I think it is a story that makes you wonder what you would do if you were in this situation. And there's definitely no right or wrong answer.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating, the different layers to it. And it also made me think of COVID because, the vaccines came out. And I know we're all kind of tired of talking about COVID now, but if you remember, it was decided for us who was going to be allowed to receive it first. And I think it went to first responders, then military, then politicians, then healthcare workers, I think seniors. And I remember thinking to myself, that's an interesting way to disperse that. Are those the most important people? Is that the hierarchy? This book gave us all a lot to think about in that regard. Thank you for
You're
that.
right, that's true. I had finished writing this before the pandemic even hit, but
Wow.
yeah, there have been there's been a lot of talk about what we do for the good of our fellow humans who are more at risk than us, right?
Yeah. It struck a chord too with me because my day job, I'm a environmental attorney, and I represent a lot of clients who have chronic illness. And in fact, kidneys and the bladder and the liver, these are target organs for a lot of the toxins they're exposed to. So many of my clients have either had a transplant or seeking one. And I have had clients who have died before they were able to get a transplant. And so this is something that really has been at the forefront of my mind for more than a decade. And I wrestled with this and I was thinking to myself, other people need to understand how difficult this issue is. So again, it struck a chord with me on many levels, and that being one of them.
That also hits on why I had decided, when I was structuring the story, I wanted Sela to have a sympathetic reason for having taken, and a complicated reason for having taken this test. And I decided that a medical reason would be really compelling, but I wasn't sure, exactly what that condition would be. And part of the reason, and I should say up front too, I think when you say it can sound kind of, I don't know, I've had people say it sounds cold to say that somebody, is taking this test looking for more family members because they desperately need a kidney. For Sela, it's much more complicated than that. She's not even sure if she wants to ask. She kind of actually gets pressured by her other friends and family into doing this test. They're the ones who are like, you have to do whatever you can do to save your own life. And she really just takes the test thinking that she won't find anything, and then she'll get them off her case. And then when she does find someone, she's much more interested in the prospect of having a sister than of necessarily having a potential organ donor. She's very hesitant to she doesn't really even want Caroline to know that she's sick at first. So it's and she's not hiding it for nefarious reasons. She's just very self-conscious about it, how she's going to come across. So it's very complicated for her. But part of the reason that I had chosen chronic kidney disease is because it is something that can be introduced. You can be having a completely normal life, and then all of a sudden there's a toxin or something as ordinary as a strep throat infection can, for some reason, set off your kidneys to start having problem with their function. COVID, a lot of people are having problems with their kidney function after having COVID. And so I think it kind of contributed for me to that idea where the story provokes me to ask and hopefully readers to ask themselves what they would do in that situation, because it doesn't seem necessarily like this sort of thing that happens to other people. It's like Sela just had really bad run of luck, and now, could happen to anybody. I think reading about her character and what happens, it just kind of has this feel that it could happen to anybody. And it's sympathetic.
I think the other wonderful thing about you picking this kidney disorder is that it can be cured if you have a donor. And in the mind of the donor, you can freely live on one kidney, but you do put your life at risk. So there's that other layer. Are you willing to put your life at risk for someone that you love? Or could it be someone that you don't even love, that you're friends with or you care about? Then that's that whole layer to this story too, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was a final theme that struck us. And again, without giving away anything too much about the book, any spoilers, there were some issues concerning mental illness and mental health. And again, a lot of the characters responded differently to things and coped differently. And I was wondering if you thought, as you were doing your research for the book, because it's clearly a well-researched book, are we where we need to be in terms of responding to mental health as a nation?
I don't know. I think we've definitely made a lot of strides. The Olympics have been on TV nonstop the last couple of weeks, and that's very much part of the conversation. The mental health of the athletes over there, with not being able to have their support network there with them because of the pandemic, and with the pressure of the 24-hour news cycle and things like that. So I think it's much more a part of our everyday conversations to talk about mental health. Are we at the point where there's no stigma and people speak about it as freely as they do about their physical health? Probably not. I know studies have shown that people who read fiction are generally more empathetic people because they've chosen to immerse themselves in stories from perspectives that are very different from their own, even if it's fictional people. That just makes for a more compassionate, empathetic human being. And so, I hope that if a story like this can be part of helping people develop that empathy and compassion, and one more storytelling step toward, normalizing those discussions about mental health, then all the better.
We absolutely agree. We think this story had so many wonderful levels and thoughts and themes that every reader could take away and really use to change their life, or in any case, allow them to consider or think about things differently from the standpoint where they were. So we thank you so much for this beautiful book. We highly recommend it. And we just want to close by asking you, what's next on your radar? I know you have another fifth book coming out on March 22nd, The Next Thing You Know. And what can you tell us about this book? Give us a little teaser.
The Next Thing You Know is about a woman working as an end of life doula. So she works with terminally ill patients who are at the end of their lives, mostly elderly patients. And then one day she has a client who is very unconventional. He's actually a musician, a cult favorite musician who has fallen off the grid. And she has no idea that he is a famous person, but he is. And he's on her doorstep, and they're about to change each other's lives forever. So that's The Next Thing You Know, and it's out March 22nd.
Well, we cannot wait to dive into this. And for our listeners, A Million Reasons Why will be available on paperback now. Here's a copy of this book, and then you're going to want to check out The Next Thing You Know. If you want to connect with Jessica Strawser, you can visit her on her website at jessicastrawser.com, or Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And thank you, Jessica. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking to you about this wonderful story.
Thank you so much for having me. You two are great.
Thank you.
Just loved that discussion with Jessica, and talk about some hot button topics that we touched on in this conversation, Kristen.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, we normally do, but really to examine some issues that, we read about it in the news, but we don't realize how often it touches our particular family or our situation until it comes up. But then as we discuss it, we see where it can come up very frequently. Mental health issues, controlling parents, secrets in a family. We all deal with those issues.
Yes, we do. We have, in my family and extended family and friends' family, we have this whole situation with family arguments, disagreements, feuds, for whatever reason. And this question really struck me. Is it ever right to say to another family member, I am cutting you out, I am never going to speak to you again? Or should we always leave some hope or some opening, maybe not for ourselves, but for future generations to come, to maintain even a sliver of a relationship with these, you could say, maybe toxic people? What are your thoughts or experiences?
I think that's a great question, but I do think we should always think in terms of boundaries, right? We have people who bring things into our lives that are troubling, that you use the word toxic. I think we should limit our exposure sometimes to people who are not able to control what they are saying and doing. And by the same token, we've got to really examine how serious is the issue? Is there an opportunity to restore that relationship? Are there things that we can talk through and maybe sit down and discuss and reconcile the relationship? Again, it's case specific, but I think we should always think in terms of reconciling if it is advisable to do so.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree with that. I love this other book. It's a nonfiction book that's been out for many years. I think I've given it to 10 people. It's called Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. And in that book, he does talk about the fact that there are people in your life that you simply can't get away from. And if there's a toxic person and you can cut all ties, that might be the best thing to do. But there may be coworkers, family members, friends that you cannot get away from. And he says it is absolutely healthy, important, and the right thing to do. Your absolute right to set boundary lines with these people and say, listen, I wish you well. We're going to maintain some sort of relationship, but you can't cross over this portion anymore because I've let you and you've hurt me again and again, and now you may not cross over this portion. And I can completely agree with that.
Absolutely. Let me ask you along those lines, Chris, when you learn information about a parent, say, for example, it's very hard to cut a parent out of your life. But what happens when you learn information that surprises you or really shakes up your view of your parent? And I had this on a very minor level because I had a wonderful father. My dad has since passed on. He was just a wonderful human being, but a wonderful father. And I remember somebody saying to me how they heard him swearing on the golf course. Now that really shook my view because I'd never heard my dad swear. And I couldn't really square my dad with what this person was describing on the golf course. Now, again, that is a minor example. I know other people who have learned that a parent engaged in infidelity or made another choice that was really shocking to them. But look at how you hold up your parents until you learn information otherwise, and that really shakes you, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And that sort of goes in line with what we were talking to Jessica about, that people are not perfect. No one's perfect, including parents or our parents. And maybe we look at these parents of ours and we say, sometimes I think with all people, not excluding even parents, but friends, I'm going to focus on all the good that you've done.
Yeah.
Every one of us can make mistakes, will make mistakes, I guarantee it, and have and will in the future. But it is a beautiful thing when we can find it in our hearts to forgive, to overlook some things, and to highlight all the good that they've done. And maybe sometimes brush aside some of the negativity. Unless, of course, I want to say for our listeners, if it's any kind of abusive situation, we do not condone brushing anything like that under the carpet. But Kristen and I are mostly talking about just everyday sorts of things that we deal with in relationships with people.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. Well, we asked Jessica what was next on her radar. So I'm going to ask you, Chris, what's on your radar? Some of the things you're thinking about or have been contemplating?
Well, I just am going back to Jessica's book, and I have a couple of people that I know right now. One has one kidney, and the other one is looking for a kidney. And I've got a lot to think about with what Jessica gave us in her story, because in their search for a kidney, there's been so much heartfelt sadness and sorrow that's gone on. But this book has unveiled to me that there's so many more layers than simply going to the hospital and waiting in line for a kidney. And I guess I can see both sides of the story, that this precious organ, there's few and far between, and let's give it to the life maybe that will live the longest. But I think we have to be so careful how we decide which life that is. And I'm just going to put more thought and a little more care into those ideas, I think. And how about you, Kristen? What's on your radar?
I was really thinking with this book that, on the outside, Caroline had this perfect life, wonderful relationships with her parents, her husband, and obviously things were not as they seemed on the outside. And it reminded me that every person is probably dealing with some painful things in their lives, whether they're mental or physical or relational. And it just was a stark reminder of how we need to deal with one another with a lot of grace and humility, because what you see on the outside, that's not always what is going on behind the scenes. In fact, it almost never is. And it's hard in this day and age with Facebook, where everybody's got their highlight reel going on. We are struggling, all of us, with, again, these relational things, maybe ailments. And it was just such a great reminder for me. And that's something I'm really contemplating for the next week or so.
I think that's words of wisdom right there that you're saying, because especially even post-COVID, we are still dealing with sicknesses and job loss, and these poor young kids who went off to college, things were ruined for them. They're trying to scrape their lives back together. Job situations. Everyone is Yes, every single person on the face of this planet is dealing with something in some form of another, and extending a little forgiveness and a little grace and a little understanding and perhaps not being so judgmental. That's a great takeaway. I'm gonna use your takeaway and take that one too.
That sounds good.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I want to, of course, give a shout out to our incredibly talented sound engineer, the Mr. Mark Carey. We're leaving you with a few storm predictions to pique your interest. Maybe you want to read ahead. We're going to be interviewing Christina Baker Klein and her life changing book, The Exiles. We have Christina McMorris and her incredible book, Sold on a Monday. Laura Morelli and the beautiful book, The Stolen Lady, and Samantha Woodruff and her eye-opening book, The Lobotomist's Wife. In the meantime, stay on the radar with Kristen and me by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. Check out our Facebook page and Twitter, or better yet, if you'd like to see us or one of your beloved authors in person, check out the video portion of this podcast on YouTube. Until next time, the best way to brave the storm is to dive down deep into some life-changing fiction.